Okay, now, tell me what happened.
All right. I'll tell you to the best of my recollection because I don't have any records with me, but I can give you dates.
Hold on a second. Hey, Terry. I'm recording, okay?
I can give you dates on some of this stuff when I get home because I do have some of the information. But basically what happened was this. Kay and Wes were married about 3 or 4 months before I was born. I was born February 19th, 1932, and I believe they were married in December of 31 or perhaps November. The exact date I have. I think because of the situation, my grandparents, who were staunch Catholics, decided that...
Mohans.
Mohan, right?
Mohan?
M-O-H-A-N. John J. Mohan.
Were they Irish?
Yes. Yeah. John J. Mohan, and his wife was Catherine, spelt with a C, not a K, Torrey. T-O-R-R-E-Y, I believe. They took care of me. I was born in Brooklyn on Casey Street. My earliest recollections, however, were living at 106 Oak Street in Brooklyn, which is just a few blocks away from Casey Street. I lived there for a while until about grade 4. Attended PS 126. Can even remember that. And then when the war broke out, my mother and father, Kay and Wes, to my recollection, never really lived together during that period of time. I don't recall any time. Now, Wes may have been in the house with Kay from time to time for a period of time. I don't know, but I can never recall ever having a family life as you would know it, normally know
Did they
it.
have a church ceremony, or was it the civil thing with a county courthouse?
That I couldn't tell you. But there may be some indication on the marriage license. But as I say, because my grandparents were staunch Catholics, they wanted to see to it that I was raised in the Catholic faith and saw to it that I attended catechism. No problem. They saw to it that I had all of the rituals of the Catholic Church and so on. And I don't know the exact year, but it would have been when I was about in the 4th grade, and I think the war had finally broken out in 41. Of course, December was Pearl Harbor, and it was shortly after that, probably early 42, that they moved to Vermont to take care of Charles Torrey, who would have been my grandmother's brother. He was living in Pittsburgh, Vermont. So I went along with them. Kay stayed in New York, and Wes, of course, was overseas, I guess in Europe someplace. And I would see Kay from time to time. She would come up on the train, spend a weekend, long weekend, and then go back again to work. My grandfather ultimately passed away, can't tell you the exact year, probably about 4 years later, because I was just going, we didn't have a middle school, so I had graduated from 8th grade and I was just starting high school in Vermont. It was about September or October, because my grandparents had moved back to New York because my grandfather had become quite ill, and they felt they could get better medical care there. They left me in care of some friends up in Vermont, and I lived with them for about 6 months. Continued on to school. I guess he passed away in New York, and all of the affairs were settled, and they drugged me back from Vermont to New York City, at which point I was enrolled in the High School of Commerce in New York. The High School of Commerce was located where Lincoln Center is now. They tore it down to build Lincoln Center.
Well, that was a rough area.
Big improvement.
Yeah, right. That's
Yeah,
where West
it was a little bit of a rough area at the time, but I survived okay.
So that's where you went through high school?
That's where I went to high school. I graduated from the High School of Commerce in 1950. 2 days after graduation, Kay and I left for Los Angeles. The reason that we left for Los Angeles is, as I said, in the meantime, Wes had gone out to the West Coast, apparently to be staged for whatever was going to take place in the Pacific. And then, of course, the war ended. And as a result, Kay wanted to go out to the West Coast, get together, because all the grandparents had, my grandmother hadn't perished yet, but the grandfather was gone, and he was the steering influence in a lot of what took place in my early years. So when we got out to the West Coast, the intent was to find out what the situation was between Kay and Wes.
Okay.
Were they
There was
still
no
going
divorce
to...
during the war.
There was no divorce that ever took place during the war. There was no divorce at that point in time.
Because the only way I know about this is Dad filled out some records for security clearance when he worked at the Sunworks at Lockheed.
Okay?
And it indicates she divorced him in 1942.
All right, well, let's keep going.
Didn't happen.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
Because, as I say, when we got out to the West Coast, it was with... See, divorce was not something that appeared very often in the Catholic.
Right.
As a result, my grandfather, if it was 1942, would never have stood still for it, I don't believe. That's why I don't believe anything ever took place at that point, because my mother said, the reason that we're going out there is to see if we can become a family. Well, when we got out there, Wes had a girlfriend out there named Terry. I can't think of her last name. She was a photographer.
He used to talk about her a lot.
Yeah.
Was he living with her?
No. She had her own place out there. He had his.
Laguna Beach, right?
No, it wasn't on the beach. I will be able to think of the name. Hudson Avenue. He had a little apartment on Hudson Avenue
Los Angeles.
in Los Angeles, actually very close to Hollywood. In fact, I think it is technically part of the Hollywood district. And he lived upstairs in that little apartment at the time. While we were attempting to get settled, we took a room in a house on Hudson Avenue so that we could get together. Well, it was
You and Kay.
Kay and I. It was a very friendly atmosphere. There was Kay, there was Wes, there was Terry, and there was myself, and we would get together and go to the beach. And I was enjoying Los
And how
Angeles.
old were you again? 19?
I would have graduated from high school now, so I was about 18, 19 in there.
I
Yeah.
didn't know about any of this.
Okay. This was 1950. Actually, Kay and I arrived in Los Angeles July 4th, 1950. We decided, we had gone out primarily for vacation and to try and find out what the situation was going to be between Wes and Kay. Well, apparently they had their conversations that I was not privy to, and came to a conclusion that things were not going to really work. But in the meantime, we decided that we liked Los Angeles. I liked Los Angeles the moment I arrived there. And we weren't going back to New York, and therefore the logical thing to do is find some employment. About a month after arrival there, I got a job with Pitney Bowes, and Kay got a job, but I couldn't tell you exactly who she worked for, because the interesting thing about Kay is in the years that she was in Los Angeles, by her count, she accounts for something like 68 jobs. Whereas I had one job for 40 years, Pitney Bowes, right? Anyway, this now would have been between 1950 1952. In 1952, August 4th, I was drafted. So it was that span of time in between those 2 years that I was working for Pitney, used to see Wes on the weekends. We'd sit in a little tavern down there at the corner of Melrose and some other cross street. And I was still living with Kay, however. We had a two-bedroom apartment. I think we had about 2 or 3 of them in that 2-year span of time. She met this fellow, Arthur Kane was his name. Everybody referred to him as Dusty during that period of time. And I believe, although I'm not 100% certain, that it was either during that period of time or right after I was drafted that Wes met your mother, Madeline.
So I always thought he met her around 1955, just about a year before I was born.
Well,
I don't know
okay,
when
let me
that-
carry the story a little further then. Obviously, during 1952 and 54, I was in the service. I took my basic up at Camp San Luis Obispo, so I never left California. Used to come home on weekends, and I'd stay at Wes's apartment. This is why I knew he lived on Hudson Avenue, because
Did you ever get deployed to Korea?
Oh yes,
Okay.
yeah. I'd come home on the weekend. I was in the Signal Corps, and I had a 26-week training period in radio repair. It was one of the longest programs that they had for a draftee at the time, and so I would see Wes quite frequently, but I didn't see too much of Kay, because what happened is Kay took up with Dusty, and the two of them moved to, I can't recall now whether it was Las Vegas first and then Phoenix, but they ultimately ended up in Phoenix, Arizona.
Did they ever marry? Okay, so she just took his name.
Well, wait, we're getting to that. Yeah, there's still more to this story. Yeah, I did eventually go to Korea in June of 53. I was sent over to Korea, and about within a couple of weeks after I was there, the fighting stopped, so I never really got into any of that, but I was there for the duration of my time, and I was mustered out in 1954, in August of 1954. Now, during that period of time, Kay and Dusty had a child, Kim Kane. And I think during that period of time, or maybe it was after that,
That makes her your half-sister?
she is my half-sister. Now, in the meantime, Madeline came on the scene. And I'm not sure, so it could have been around 1955. That would have been just within a year after I got out of the military. When I got out of the military, the first thing I did, by then, Kay, Dusty, and Kim had all come back to Pennsylvania, Rutledge, Pennsylvania. That's where Dusty was from. His mother had passed away, and they all came back to settle the estate. In the meantime, my grandmother, the one who I had been up in Vermont with, had become quite ill, and my mother and Dusty decided that they would take her under their wing and attempt to care for her. So she was brought down to Pennsylvania, and the three of them were living in Rutledge at the time of my discharge. So when the ship brought me back to Seattle, and they asked where I wanted to go, I said, hey, Pennsylvania is where my folks are living, because at that time, I was more, my ties, I guess, were closer to Kay, really, than they were to Wes. And so I came back. I was mustered out at George Meade, Fort George Meade, right, in Maryland. And they said, well, where do you live? I said, oh, I live in Los Angeles. And they said, well, what fool sent you way back here? And they gave me travel pay back to Los Angeles again, which was kind of neat. But in any case, I stayed in Rutledge for about 6 weeks, I guess, and then decided, hey, this is not for me. I'm going back out to the West Coast. Used the travel advance that they had given me, plus some money I had left over and whatnot, bought a car, drove out to Los Angeles, got my job back with Pitney Bowes, and I moved in to the house that Wes was still living in. He was still in that place on Hudson Avenue, and I took the room next to him.
Yeah,
So that's why I know he was there.
about the house, the apartment.
Okay. Now, did Madeline work for a restaurant called Allen's at one time?
I remember Oblats, I remember Toppings, don't remember Allen's.
Okay, well, I have a hunch that where Wes actually met Madeline might have been at Allen's, because there was a restaurant there not too far from where he lived called Allen's, and I don't recall Madeline at that point in time. All right? Now, that would have been 1954. In the meantime, I had my own life. I was off by myself now. I had met a girl that I enjoyed being with and whatnot. And 1955, a year after I got out of the service, I was married
To Jan.
to Jan.
I have the photographs.
Okay. Wes attended the service, the ceremony. My mother did not. She, I think, was still in Pennsylvania.
Photographs show you, Jan, my dad,
Okay.
the rest of them.
Well, I think at that point, Kay was starting to come back west again. She got as far as Colorado, and she settled down in there for a while. She and Dusty and my grandmother. To my knowledge, at this point, still no divorce, no marriage, no nothing. 1956, a year after we were married, Stephen was born, my oldest son.
So Stephen and I are almost exactly.
You
the same.
are a little younger than Stephen.
Okay.
Yeah. That was one of the things that we always thought was rather odd, is
Yeah.
Stephen had an uncle that was younger than he was.
Yeah,
right.
right.
Right. You are a little younger than Stephen. By that point, I was pretty well wrapped up with my own family. I had Stephen, I had
His
Jim.
name is Stephen Wesley Clark. right?
Stephen Wesley Clark.
That's what I thought.
He was named for Dad.
I'll point out that that name persists all the way back to early 19th century.
Yeah, so it would seem.
Everybody has had it.
Yeah, you have more information on that. I'm going to ask
Ethan Wesley Clark.
Ethan Wesley, and I'm John Wesley. So that
Your
you're
name
right.
for your grandfather.
Well, John.
Great grandfather.
John, yeah.
No, John Wesley.
John Wesley? You know something here that I don't know. I know very, very little
I'll
about.
show you all about
Okay.
it later. Continue.
Then anyway, as I was saying, I was kind of wrapped up with my own family at the time, because we had kids, bang, bang, bang.
Right.
Stephen, and then Sherilyn was born with less than 2 years after that, and then less than a year after that, Holly came along. And by the time I finished spinning with the job, I had bought the house in La Mirada, California. We had the kids, and by the time I took the time to look around, there was Madeline and there was Wes, because we didn't have very close ties at that point. And in the meantime, my mother and Dusty had moved back to the West Coast again. Yeah.
And the daughter. right?
And with the daughter, and with my grandmother. And I believe they were living at that point in Long Beach, California. So I would see Wes from time to time on rare occasions. I'd see Kay on rare occasions. And okay, that brings us up to what, about 1958, or
Well, you're not answering the
So-
question. Did my parents ever marry?
okay. As much as I know about it, Wes or Madeline, one or the other, told me that they had gone to Tijuana and obtained a divorce. Nothing was ever said about a marriage, but a divorce apparently between Kay and Wes. If one took place at all, it took place in Tijuana, Mexico, or somewhere in that area. And to my knowledge, that was not recognized in the state of California, which is why they didn't, at that time, I don't know whether it is today or not, but at that time, a Mexican divorce was not recognized in the United States, which is why a lot of people that lived in the LA area used to go to Reno or to Las Vegas for quickie divorces. To my knowledge, Wes has never been to Reno. Wes didn't like to travel. He would go to Las Vegas from time to time. He and Madeline would take off. They'd spend a weekend over there, enjoy themselves for the weekend, and then come on home. But when I lived in San Francisco, I moved to San Francisco in 1962, and in the years that I lived up there, about 12 years, 13 years, I could never get Wes and Madeline to come up and visit us in San Francisco. I said, this is a wonderful place. You got to come up and see us.
Yeah, no, Dad hated to travel.
He hated to travel. So to my knowledge, I don't think he was ever in Reno.
Okay, now, you sure it's Tijuana and not Ensenada?
It could have been Ensenada.
My parents tell me two things. Mom would tell me that, I think this is right, Mom told me they got married in Ensenada on her birthday, 18th of June, 1955, which would have been, I was born in April.
Yeah, I've been right in that time span.
But Dad always told me they were married in Las Vegas. I've checked the records for Clark County, Nevada. There are no marriage records.
Fine. Let me tell you one other little piece of information that I don't know whether you are aware of or not. Did you realize that Madeline had had an abortion?
No, I didn't.
Okay. There was,
When was this?
there was, before you, there was a conception before you. And Madeline had an abortion, I think, about 1955, and she and Wes kind of split up for a little while. But she was extremely angry about the entire thing, and then this, you were born, when again, June?
I was born in April 1956.
April 56.
So this would have been what, a year?
Would have been about a year prior to that, 55.
Okay.
So somewhere in that span of time.
Just about when they told me they had been married.
Somewhere in
Boy, that doesn't sound like Mom at all, does it?
I think it does.
there. Well,
I'm not a bit surprised. Not a bit. This is pretty much what I had guessed.
okay. Well, anyway. This, let's see, after that, I kind of lost track because I had moved up north, and then I would come down from time to time and see you and see Madeline, see Wes, and that's kind of pretty much the whole
So
story.
as far as you know, they got a divorce, Dad divorced Kay in Ensenada or Tijuana. But as far as you know, it's not binding in the United
That's-
States.
When I say as far as I know, that's what I was told.
Okay.
As far as I was concerned, I've always been kind of an individual that, hey, it's your life, you know.
Did they get married?
I don't know.
They never
As
told
I
you
say,
that they
I don't
got
know
married.
even if they ever got divorced. I know that Kay never married Dusty. That I know.
And
Okay.
they had another child, didn't
Yeah. Well, they just had the one. No, they just had the
they? See,
one.
we had two conflicting stories. Wes said that they were married in Las Vegas, and Madeline said they were married in Ensenada, Mexico. And we looked both places for.
Well, no, what happened was I got messed up with the Mexican embassy. I remember.
Yeah,
That's where the
I got you. If anything,
That's why, but it would
if
just
there
go
was a
there.
divorce and there was a marriage, it would have been in that area, either Tijuana, Ensenada, somewhere in that, what is that? That's Sonora, Mexico, is it? Sonora County?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
I
think-
tried to track this down about 10 years ago,
Okay.
and I wasn't successful.
Well, I think that if you were going to find anything, that's where I would look. I don't believe that anything ever took place in Las Vegas,
Okay, no, I don't think
or
so.
in the U.S. for that matter, if it took place at all.
Okay.
So we still don't know if they were married or not.
No.
I suspect that they may have been. I suspect that they probably
It
did.
doesn't sound like my mom
Not
was
to.
allowed to the situation continue without a marriage contract in some state.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Because she and Dad had serious problems early with his drinking.
Well,
He was basically an alcoholic
That's
until
right.
1964.
yeah, he had a very serious operation at that point, didn't he?
Right.
Liver problem or
He
something?
started, watch out, he started hemorrhaging one night, and they had to take him off to the hospital.
Yeah,
And he very nearly died.
yeah, I recall
And then after
that.
that, he was on the wagon, and
Yeah, I recall
and
that.
he didn't take a sip until just before he died. Then he started to do things like he'd take a glass of beer or something.
Okay.
Really?
And then all the fights and arguments started with
Well,
All right.
Did she collect dolls?
yes.
it. Oh, yeah.
Uh-huh. Does anybody else collect them? Do you collect them?
We have a lot of bird dogs.
You do? Do you have them displayed?
You want to show your snap?
No, that's not my thing at all.
Mhm.
Read,
You want to sell
when you
them?
get back home, I will send you, if I haven't done it already, the URL for Avocado Memories. It's basically growing up with Dad and Mom.
Oh, yeah, they
Dad,
saw it.
67.
Yeah.
No, you didn't have a chance to see it, did you?
Yeah, it was on
I,
the internet.
I saw, I think, is that the one that you had the pictures of the house?
Yeah.
And you talked about,
Oh, yeah, there's a lot more than that, though.
yeah, I didn't see the entire thing, but I got to the part
You're
of
in.
Martin Denny and the rainfall coming down, which is, I remember that very well.
You're in it, by the way.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that,
we saw it.
yeah, that I
We
saw.
a jacket and
Yeah, that I
Kiana
saw.
shirt and fashion.
Meredith,
Well, I was just telling,
restricted
passage, no
kids go by there.
I was just telling Carol that Madeline was a very difficult person.
Ooh, boy, was she ever.
Well, she was
Especially with
very,
her daughter-in-law.
she was very headstrong, and I think that was probably good for Wes, because Wes was extremely laid back.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And
Yeah,
he,
was.
anything was kind of okay with him.
Well, the thing is, see, I surmised that she was pregnant.
Girls
See, now I
pregnant.
think that when she got pregnant the second time, she said, "This is it."
She said that the first time.
She did?
There was a lot of problems over
Really?
that. Oh,
Like
it
what?
was. Well, they had been living together in, I can picture where this place is approximately, but I couldn't tell you the
Los
exact
Angeles?
address. It was in Los Angeles.
Virginia Avenue?
You know where Santa Monica Boulevard crosses the Hollywood Freeway. The
Mhm.
Hollywood Freeway goes north, and there's a little triangular area right
I've seen
in
it
the.
before, right.
Okay, right in that area is where they were living, and I believe that at the time that Stephen was born, or right after it, which, as I say, would have been just about a year after Jan and I married, was the period of time when all of this disruption occurred. And,
I think that was Virginia Avenue.
okay,
Mom told me
that
about
kind
it.
of rings a bell.
The
Yeah.
first apartment was in Virginia Avenue.
That rings a bell, because I think the two of them were living there together, and as I say, this problem occurred, and that split them up for a while,
Mhm.
but not really for a long, long while. And then I guess they got back together again,
Do you know anything about there being a problem with my dad seeing Terry while he was married to my mom?
and no, I'm not. Yeah, it's still trying.
Okay.
I'm not aware of any problem there. Terry was kind of, I always envisioned Terry as kind of a good friend, not
Yeah, right.
not particularly a lover or anything like that. She was just kind of everybody's good friend. It's the best way I could describe her. I'm sure she was a little bit more of a good friend than what I know, but. I don't think during that period of time.
Did Madeline drink at first when they?
I don't ever recall Madeline drinking.
Really?
No, I
Because
don't.
my theory was that she drank too, and then when she quit, she
No,
badgered him too.
no. I think I think it was some of the other problems.
Well, she badgered him to quit to save
Yeah.
his life.
Well, yeah.
Well, that was part of it, and the other part of it is Wes liked to hang out with the guys. He had this little pub that he visited down in Melrose, and I don't know whether it was Coanga. It seems to me it was right around Coanga, Melrose. Anyway, he'd go in there on a Saturday afternoon and sit and soak up several beers and a lot of conversation, and a lot of his buddies. And I think the same thing was true while he was working for Lockheed. I think there were a lot of the fellows there that after the shift closed down, that they'd step across the street or go
Yeah.
someplace.
And his mother owned a place
I
like
used to
that.
work there, and it's, pretty
Okay.
much the culture there.
Yeah, and I think that may have been what created some of the problems. Why aren't you home? What are you doing? That sort of activity. So, yeah, that may have been what
My
you're
mom was rather tense.
Was she?
Yeah.
She mellowed out after she retired. Well, the thing is, these drunks would sit there, and Wes Pierre was working his tail off, going to college, trying, working so hard, and they'd make all these comments about how he was a bad son, and then she'd get all this in her head, it would stew for a while, then we'd get these phone calls out of the blue about, and she'd be really mad about some imagined slight. I mean, I couldn't put a foot right with her, although she never ever criticized my housekeeping or my raising of my children, never, and I really appreciated that, and she was a wonderful friend.
She was the world's greatest grandma.
Oh, yeah.
I'm convinced that the happiest time in her life was when the grandkids came along. After Dad had died, that relieved a lot of the stress in her life.
Well, I'll tell you something. She thought the world of you.
Oh, yeah, I know.
She really, the sun rose and set on Little Wes.
Yeah, I know.
Everybody referred to you as Little Wes.
Well, that made it tough on me, too. See,
Yeah.
she had some apron strings that she was just not.
Made it tough. It made it tough on you, and I think it even made it a little tough on my wife Jan, because she felt that
He and Mom got into a big fight about Terry.
okay. I
don't
didn't
remember
know.
the details.
I didn't know there was ever any problem. This isn't running yet.
Yeah, it is. No, no, it isn't.
Okay, yeah, it is.
That's curious. What's the deal? Maybe the tape's sticking.
All right.
Who knows?
Anyway, I don't recall any major problems between Madeline and Wes and Terry. There may have been, and if there were, it may have cropped up about the time of this other incident, because there was a lot of, shall we say, dissatisfaction at that point in time. But I didn't get too involved in it, Wes, because I was down with, I had my own life, my own family, yeah. And we knew of it. We knew of the situation, and I knew that, Madeline was extremely angry, had moved out. Can't blame her.
Well, she moved out from him,
Yeah, yeah.
and that was for a while, and then she
Well,
moved
yeah,
out.
now, I don't know whether she moved out from him or he moved out from her, but they split for a while. Seems to me that the span of time wasn't really great, though, a few months at the most, a couple of months, and I think they were still seeing, there was still communication, obviously, and this was after the abortion. So, there must have been some communication.
Did Dad ever talk to you about his father or his grandfather? Or
I
did you ever
knew,
get the story about the Marbury family?
no, I knew very, very little about the family on my father's side, and I think that was because of the situation that I explained to you at the beginning. As I say, there was only 3 months between the marriage and my birth, and so obviously my grandfather held a very tight rein on Kay, because she was an only child.
Now, Dad's dad was alive until 1942. You had never met Harry? Oh, here's a
I
good
did.
question. Hey, honey, what is Dad's real name? Is it Wesley or is it Harry?
I think it's Wesley Harry, isn't it?
I-
I've got his birth records, and they say Baby Clark.
Yeah.
No help at all.
I
He went by
always-
Wes sometimes. He went. See, I'm Wesley Harry Clark Jr.,
Military records say.
which tells me his name must have been Wesley.
I thought it was
I
Big
always,
West, Little
I
West
always
is
thought
the-
it was Wesley Harry, Wesley H. Clark. I always thought that, but I really
He signed himself
don't. Now, there may be
different.
something on the
H.
marriage
Wesley.
certificate. I'll look when I get back, because I do have that.
Oh, that's right. You've got his name on. Okay, well, it
I
depends on
believe
what he
I do.
signed
I'm going to have to
himself.
search a little bit when I get home, but I think I can come up with that, and I'll see to it that you get a copy of that.
Okay.
But that would be, I'm pretty sure on that it says Wesley H. Clark,
Okay.
but I'm not positive.
See, he always went by Harry.
He always went by Harry?
All through Lockheed, his name is Harry.
Well,
I've never heard him refer to anything other than Wes in my life. including his friends that used to come over from
Yeah,
Lockheed.
I've
I
got
don't recall
documents,
calling him Harry.
that,
Yeah.
he
Can't
was
you
Harry.
find
Julie,
his,
please don't hurt it, honey. It scratches the teeth.
what does
Jeez,
it
he would have
say
done
on
well
his
with the
death
CIA. He kept,
What's it say, his death certificate?
he kept a pretty close.
Well, I'm the one who's responsible for his death certificate.
Oh, so you give
And I gave
information.
them Wesley Harry
Yeah.
Clark Senior because
You were Wesley Harry
Jr.
Clark Jr. It makes
But I
sense
had
that
no
he
proof
was
of
Wesley
that.
Harry Clark.
Yeah, see, if you were the provider,
Yeah.
then, that's right.
So,
the
so you never
information
met,
is yours.
you never met Henry Wesley?
That was
That's-
his dad?
Yeah. You
I
never met him.
believe that I did.
He died in 1942.
Okay, I have very vague recollections of his mother, who was Nellie,
Yeah,
his father, and of course my Aunt Evelyn. I remember
Right.
Aunt Evelyn.
Naomi.
And Naomi, Naomi I met in later years when I had moved back to Vermont, to New York from Vermont, and of course I was a little older. We'd gone out to Long Island. By then she was married to a Frank Schmidt.
Right.
And
Still, well, yeah, he's still alive.
oh, he is. Okay, I always wondered about that.
I met a cousin of ours named Kate Kinsler. She gives me some information. She has a lot of, well, she has what data I have on the Clarks back in the late 19th century.
Okay. Well, I have the information that didn't she have 3 kids? She and Frank had
Yeah.
three children.
I've got their names someplace.
Okay. Well, I recall meeting them. I recall going out there. It was wintertime. We went ice skating.
How you do
someplace.
it?
So that situation stuck with me. But Aunt Evelyn used to come over from time to time. Before I moved to Vermont, at Christmas time, I'd always see Aunt Evie at Christmas time. And I understand that she committed suicide. Is that the
Who
same?
committed suicide?
That was my understanding. You didn't know
She
that?
died in 1948. I've got some church service, but I didn't know that.
Somewhere along the line, I had heard that she turned on the gas one time. And
Why?
And
Well, see if I can ever get in touch with Frank Schmidt, maybe I'll find out. But I haven't been able to get in touch.
I had heard that somewhere along the line from my family. I didn't think an awful lot of it at the time, but of course I've always carried that piece of information with me. It seemed kind of, she was never married, at least not to my knowledge. I never recall an uncle anybody. All I ever remember was Aunt Evelyn. And when she would come at Christmas time, she'd always be by herself. So to my knowledge, she didn't marry, but I don't know for a fact. Couldn't tell you for a
And
fact.
she's still
Okay,
good.
so
Well, okay.
you barely remember
Exercise,
Nellie-
I watch what I ate. I
Nellie
keep my
Nielsen?
cholesterol on a dog.
See, I can tell you a lot about the
I
Nielsen
should
brothers.
be.
I do remember seeing her on a few occasions when my grandfather, I guess, would allow me to go over to the Clark household. As I say, he held the reins, and because of the situation, they were pretty tight. And I don't think it was.
Yeah, see, they lived in New York City or Brooklyn. I'm not sure, they weren't far from me at all.
No, I don't know the address, but they had to have lived in Brooklyn because the way, I guess, all of this came about is that Wes and Kay were tennis players.
What, Wesson?
Wes and Kay.
Played tennis?
Right. They used to play tennis. I had pictures of them in early years playing tennis with a group of other friends. There was a fellow by the name of Cliff, another guy by the name of Al Minner. There was Wes, and
White grape or purple, because it doesn't mean it, purple grape juice.
I can't remember all of them, but I remember seeing pictures of all of these groups in their little white tennis shorts and tennis shirts and tennis rackets.
Well, yeah, I do have some of those pictures. Dad was quite a dresser when he was young.
Oh yeah, he
The
liked it.
pictures I have, he wasn't.
Yeah, he liked to do this. Right, he liked to do that. And yeah. Well, it was just one of those things that I never thought anything about because my grandparents took very good care of me, and it's like having a family of sorts, but it's just a little different.
So.
Well, I gotta tell you, the Clarks are a
lost
mystery.
20 pounds.
They left very little records that I've been able to trace.
30.
And it's just,
And I'm central review.
I'm trying to figure out, I'm gonna give you some genealogical files. I'll give you a program that our church produces for genealogical files, and it allows you to put names and dates and everything, and
Now,
link up family members.
Are you with LDS?
I'm still Mormon.
You're still Mormon.
So is Gary Will.
Yeah, well, we're a little bit aware of some of what they have available for genealogy.
Oh, it's huge. Chances are you'll find yourself, if she continues doing genealogy, she'll bump into it at some point.
Oh, no question about it. She's already well aware of it.
Yeah, that's
She's-
the Living History Center.
She's the genealogist in the family, and I have never had the opportunity to really find out anything about
Well, see,
either
I've
side of
always
my
been
family.
curious about it.
There's nobody.
Mom's line, I've gotten all the way back to the 1600s. It's really consistent. Being French Canadian, their parish records, documentation. all
Oh,
over the
yeah,
place.
yeah.
Everybody's accounted for. There isn't a single English surname going all the way back to the late 1500s. They're all French. So, but Dad's family is different. I've gotten the Gaskell family. You don't know about them.
No.
I've gotten the Gaskell family back to the 1600s. I've gotten the Niffen family. Now, did Dad ever tell you that he was part Dutch? Or anything about the Dutch Reformed Protestant Church?
No.
Okay, you didn't get any of that?
To my knowledge, he was not a churchgoer of any denomination. He just didn't have too much to do with it.
Well, see, as far as I know, I may be the only Clark who knows anything about our family. Nobody else does, apparently.
That's right.
And Dad's been giving me misdirection all through the years. He told me one time that the family name was originally Marbury, and they changed it to Clark. No record of that whatsoever. That's bogus. He told me that the Niffens were really Dutch, and for that reason he's Dutch Reformed Protestant. Well, he's not Dutch Reformed Protestant. He never was.
Dad
The
used
Niffens aren't even Dutch.
Dad used to like to tell stories.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. I think he invented things from time to time.
So part of my problem was just forgetting anything he had ever told me, just striking out and figuring
Yeah,
out
yeah.
records. They
Figuring
were
out
difficult. But the Clark family, my name is Wesley Harry Clark. Ethan's is Ethan Wesley Clark. You're John Wesley Clark. You've got a son named Stephen Wesley Clark. Dad was Wesley Harry Clark, Sr., as far as I could tell. His father appears as Henry Wesley Clark in the documentation. His father was John Wesley Clark. His father was Wesley Clark.
Roseville Pottery.
And it may be Wesley H. Clark, I can't tell. And that's where my knowledge stops. I don't know who our great-great-great-grandfather was. But I have some clues.
Where
I
do you
had hoped to
trace?
figure that out before you had gotten here, but I haven't been able.
Where do you trace him back to? The New York area or
Nope. New Jersey.
New Jersey?
Our family is originally from Burlington County, New Jersey.
Burlington County?
Hold on a second.
Absolutely.
Honey!
What? Are we interfering with this?
You have a question?
I just can't hear Jack. See, the problem is I have a slight hearing problem, and in any room and this room is like an echo chamber. And it just, as near as I can tell, it's this John Wesley Clark, our great-grandfather, who moved from New Jersey to New York City. Before that, the whole family was
About
in New
what
Jersey.
time period?
1850?
1850s?
And I'm personally thankful because trying to do genealogy in New York City is next to impossible.
Yeah, well,
It's huge. It
that's
always has been.
kind of why I didn't make too much attempt myself to back it up.
Well, it's a lot
Carol's-
easier to focus in on a place like New Jersey in a few counties than
Yeah.
it is New York City.
Yeah, well, that's
New
what
York
we
City's
found
always
in Connecticut last week because she was looking for people on her father's side, and so we did a lot of tracing around, and the records are all there. I mean, we went back to the 1850s without too much trouble at all.
Right.
But
It's getting much further back than that. That's usually.
But I was trying to do sort of what you've been doing with the name Mohan, M-O-H-A-N, because I figured that's a little easier to work with than Clark. There probably weren't as many Mohans or Tories, although Tory was spelled 2 or 3 different ways.
Yeah, what you'll have to be aware of with Mohan is the spelling's probably very...
That's what I was told by an Irishman that I ran into. He said, yeah, he said, a lot of people changed it. It was called something else, and they
The other thing you also have to watch out for is Beniffins, for instance. There's also a branch called Sniffen. Families break off into two different family names like that.
Okay.
But anyway, I've got some genealogical files and some photographs. I can show you what
Yeah, I'd like to see them.
what Grandpa looked like.
I have one photograph at home of, call it a family photograph, of Kay, Wes, and myself, taken by Terry, of all people. It was right after we got to Los Angeles. We had been there about a week. Terry picked us up. She had one of those yellow Jeep Wagoneers. We were so popular right after the war. Took us down to the beach, and then we came back and we went to this little bar that Wes liked to frequent. And we were in there having a couple of beers, and she took a shot of us. That's the only family photograph I've got with all three of us.
Do you have a scanner? Do you have access to a scanner?
Not yet. I'm going to get one before the end of the year. I hope to get one before the end of the year.
Okay. When you do, could you please scan that for me and send me the
Yeah,
electronic?
sure.
What I'm going to give you is the photographs that I have. I've scanned them, and I have them on .bmp, Windows, Microsoft Windows format.
Good. Okay.
So
No
I can send
problem.
those to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Would love to. Would love to see.
And I've also written who they are. Why don't I show that stuff? Have you guys? Are you thirsty or anything, or hungry?
Well, honey, we're not hungry, but I wouldn't mind having a glass of water.
You want to turn this off for a minute and save the tape? Sure.
He never divorced her totally.
Never divorced who?
I don't think he ever really
It wouldn't
divorced
have had anything to
Pat.
do with divorcing her. If anything, it would have had to do with why you might have wanted to. Now,
Oh, well,
Terry
yeah,
gets
but
that.
I don't think,
Oh, that's a good picture.
that's a good picture.
I think that was taken by Aunt Terry.
What Carol was referring to. Yeah.
He liked his beer, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
I know what he's on.
Until 1964.
What Carol was referring to was a story that I have that it appears that during the time that Wes was overseas, Kay was playing around a little bit herself. I don't know all of the details, but she worked for a construction company called Walter Kidder. And during that period of time, Kidder had contracts to build ships. And she worked for a fellow by the name of Kennedy. His first name was Tom Kennedy. Now, Tom Kennedy was married.
Those are all.
Kay was a secretary for Kennedy, and as a result, I guess she was a pretty good secretary or a pretty good something. But in any case, he used to take her to the launchings of these ships. And I think he lived down on Long Island, as the story goes. Wes came home from Europe unannounced. Went to where Kay was living at the time, only to find that Mr. Kennedy was occupying the premises and I think possibly the bedroom.
Oh.
And Wes left and never looked back. And I think that is the story that Carol is referring to. But again, it's like a lot of other stories, they're stories. You don't really know the details. And
Well, I used to know.
Oh, okay.
Grew up with
Your old
Marine Corps.
girlfriend.
No, she's not really grew up.
I'll put this off because I
All the
think
rest
that's...
of this is just...
Okay, well, I pulled these out.
Okay, so, Dad was never around the household when you were being raised?
Not that I can recall. My earliest recollections of a household, now I was born at 126, I believe it was, or maybe it was 26 Casey Street, I think. Actually, I was born in the hospital, but we were living, I believe, on Casey Street is what I was told, which is just a few blocks away from where we ended up on Oak Street, because my earliest recollections are of Oak Street. And I don't recall from the time that we lived on Oak Street Wes ever being around for any great length of time. He would kind of come and go, you
No,
know.
this was from 1932, when you were born, to 1942, when he got drafted.
Yeah, we're talking
He
about.
was drafted, right?
I assume so.
World War II, yeah. I think
assume
he told
so.
me he was drafted.
Okay,
So there's 10 years period of time when you don't recall seeing him around?
that's right. Now, I do recall, you know, it's funny how you can recall certain incidents that took place in your life. I can remember 106 Oak Street. I can even tell you the telephone number at 106 Oak Street, because when you were a little kid, they always said, remember your phone number if you ever get lost.
Right.
But the only people that lived there, it's a two-story house, and it had a basement, but not, the basement wasn't fully below ground level. And they had what was called an areaway in front of it, so that you had windows that opened up onto an opening that was below ground. That's where the kitchen was. And then one flight up from the kitchen was a living room, a couple of bedrooms, and then there was another apartment on the top floor. Now, Kay, my mother, my grandmother, my grandfather, and myself occupied the lower half of that house at 106 Oak Street, and my aunt, who was my grandfather's sister, occupied
On your mom's side?
on my mother's side, yeah.
Okay.
Grandfather's sister on my mother's side. My Mamie Moan was her name. John J. Moan was his. And my mother was born Catherine Marie Moan. But my aunt lived on the top floor of this house, and we occupied the middle floor as well as this subterranean section.
Well, what was Wes? Okay.
But Wes was never there.
Yeah, but where was he?
I don't know. I assume that he lived on, was it Noble Street, that
Yeah.
address that you
Yeah.
had? I believe that he was there. I assume that he was there with his mother and father, Nellie and Harold.
Okay, maybe you said this already, but so he separated from your mom almost right away.
I don't really know that he was ever allowed to live in the house. Keep in mind what had happened here.
Oh, okay.
In a situation, I mean, these kids, and they were kids at the time, because I think my parents were probably only around 18. I've never really puzzled it out, but I assume that they were only around 18 or 20 when I was conceived. And obviously unmarried at the time. Keep in mind that my grandfather, who was extremely strict with his only daughter, Catherine Marie, thought very dim of this entire thing, and took a very firm hand in how things were going to be. And I'm not so sure that Wes was ever allowed to live in the house, although he did come by from time to time. And I think that was what, destroyed any possibility of there ever being a family. Now, whether Wes never really wanted a family or not, then that's possibility certainly exists. But I do recall that there were some parties at this house. When I say parties, I'm talking about parties that kids 18, 20, 21, 22 would throw. Because
Your parents' age.
not my parents, right, would throw the party, not my grandparents. But I think the parties were kept at the house at my grandfather's insistence to make sure that nothing could go wrong. So that's my earliest recollection of the situation. As I say, they never lived together, to my knowledge, all the period of time that I was really an only child. Well, my grandparents took good care of me. They brought me up, I think, as Carol said, with a firm hand, and kept me under control. I recall a number of things that used to irritate me. One of the things in those days, 39, 40, 38, I recall when I was in school, my grandfather insisted that I wear knickers. I don't know whether you know what knickers are, these little things that come. Now, at that period of time, other kids were wearing long pants. Everybody was wearing long pants, but I wore knickers. And he insisted on it, and I used to be very embarrassed to go to school in these stupid things. And they were corduroy to top all that off, so that when you walk down the street, they go zip, 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 zip.
Yeah, right. Well, you know, I've got a lot of old Little Rascals movies.
with knickers
dating
on.
From about your period.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're wearing knickers.
That's what they wore.
Yeah.
But it was during that period of time that kids were starting to wear long pants, and at school that's what they were wearing, except for me. And I couldn't seem to get that across, because I think my grandmother finally intervened and said, listen, we're going to get him a pair of long pants.
How old were you when you finally built up any sort of a relationship with Dad?
Not until I got to California,
Not until after you graduated from high school?
right? When I moved to California was the first time that he and I really got to sit down and get to know one another, at least to some extent. Up until that time, all I ever had was stories if I asked questions, and of course the stories were, I'm sure, very biased. And, where is Dad? Well, he's in Europe right now, or he's fighting, or he's overseas. And when you're that age and you've got a million other things on your mind anyway,
Sort of accepted it.
and everybody else's father is overseas, you kind of accept it, and you go about your business. But I guess my grandparents were such a strong influence on me that I worried more about where they were than I worried about where Wes was. So it really wasn't until we got out to California, and I suspect I got to know him even better after I got back from Korea, and I had that short span of time before I got married myself, and we were both living in the same. Didn't see really an awful lot of him except on weekends, because he worked swing shift
Yeah, right.
and I worked during the day.
Well,
So
he was working swing shift starting when?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the year was, but
Because I can only remember him working swing shift, never worked anything but.
okay. Well, I think he did prefer that, because he liked having his mornings to himself before he went to work. Figured that by the time he got off and had a couple of beers and came home, well, he'd sleep late in the morning and then
Yeah.
had the mornings to himself. He liked working swing shift. But it precluded my really getting to know too much about him at that point, because I'd work during the day, I'd come home, he'd be gone.
Yeah, right.
I'd go to bed, he'd come home.
Yeah, see, essentially I was raised by mom because he was always gone. The only
Yeah.
thing I can remember about him from when I was little was his, keep asking me if I wanted a hot dog or something to eat. Want to take a nap? No. Kept asking me if I wanted to take a nap.
Well, I think it was because, he hadn't really had any experience at raising me. Now, whether he really ever wanted to be a father or not is, that's another question. One that'll probably never be answered. But I think it was something he grew into, because he really did appreciate having you around. And he used to talk about you all the
Well,
time.
we had a great time when he got older, after he
Yeah.
retired.
Yeah.
But the funny thing about it was that you were raised by very young parents. I had older parents. Dad was 43 when I was born, Mom was 34. Consequently, when I was 10 years old, Dad was in his mid-50s. And he was long past caring. It's fashionable now, but he was long past caring about any PTA meetings or anything like that. Consequently, they never...
But then it's not too different, because, as I said, it was my grandparents that raised me, and they were in their 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
That's where most of my influence came from. The little that I had to do with Kay occurred when I moved back from Vermont. As I told you in an earlier tape, my grandfather had passed away. I had been left up there to live with some friends while he was in the hospital in New York, and I'm not even sure what he died of, technically. But when I came back to New York, when they left this place in Vermont, that incidentally is still in the family up there. It's still up in Pittsburgh. We went back to take a look at it not too long ago. But when we came back to New York, I lived with my mother at an apartment that she had in New York, and I got the feeling that she told my grandmother, that it was her mother, that it was a little difficult to take care of me and to work at the same time. Well, of course, my grandmother wasn't working. And I guess she said, well, we have this apartment here. You can come and live with us. Us being my grandmother and my grandfather's sister. It was really my grandfather's sister's apartment. And it was 1, 2, 3 bedroom. Was located on 21st Street and 8th Avenue in New York City. So I went to live with my grandmother at that point while my mother continued to live by herself. I think what it boiled down to, now that I can think back on it, is that I probably interfered with her her love
Interfered with
life.
her being young.
Yeah. But that was okay.
Dad never told you, never talked to you at all about his father or his father's father or anything else?
No. These weren't discussions that we got into. The stuff that we would chat about if we sat down, for instance, is what you've been up to, and well, I got this great job, Dad, with Pitney Bowes, and this is what I do all day, and it's I'd talk a little bit about that, or I'd talk a little bit about the car that I just bought.
Spray painted. Now, what car was this? A spray painted turquoise? A Chevy?
It was yeah. When I first moved to California, I had no driver's license, nothing. I was just out of high school. But as you well realize, it's pretty difficult to get